Welcome everybody back to Author Mastery Insights, and we are with the Dr. Rob Melillo, one of my favorite human beings and an incredible best-selling author, professor, teacher, world-class practitioner, multiple brain center owning practitioner, an incredible opportunity to learn again from a great master. Dr. Rob, it is always wonderful to connect with you.
Same here, Marcus. It's always great to speak with you.
I'm excited to speak about so much. And before we begin, we're going to be talking today about two books in particular, but I want to highlight the incredible work that you've done. And I also want to acknowledge this little classic. Ventured recently into the beauty of children's books and bringing, the brain and chiropractic neuroscience into that arena. I'm so excited for that. For those not familiar, not only does he write best-selling books, but textbooks as well. And if you need and want to learn, functional neurology and neurobehavioral processes from a chiropractic viewpoint, that is a classic. A world leader in autism, but this is where I want to have a conversation with you today. The Disconnected and Reconnected Kids. These books have been so instrumental for not only chiropractors, but people in the community wanting to find solutions to challenges and difficulties with their children, not only behavior and learning, but a host of other things. So I'm going to just start this conversation with asking you to talk about what Disconnected Kids is. Not just the book, but the theory and the premise.
Yeah, well, it really all started with, that textbook. And it started with, a few questions. And the question was, I was at the time looking into and interested for personal reasons and professional reasons, what was actually happening in the brain of a child with ADHD or autism or OCD or tics or Tourette's. And, so the questions kept on getting a little bit more to the root cause, meaning start with, well, what is behavior, right? We're talking about behavior. What is cognition? What is it in the brain? How do we define it? Where does it live? And then even more, what is a brain? Where did a brain come from? What was the first brain that evolved on this planet and why, right? So that's really where it started with the textbook, that's why it talks from an evolutionary perspective. And it really goes back to the very beginning and talking about how really the beginning of brain starts with movement, that everything starts with motor development and movement. And as Rodolfo Linus refers to it as motricity. And then from there, brains evolve because we move. And then from there, the more complex we move, the more complex brains evolve. And out of that emerges, really cognition and behavior. And, it's really interesting because the reason why movement facilitated brains was because as soon as you move in a purposeful way, as soon as a living thing could control their own movement, they're faced immediately with a choice. And that choice is, where do I move? Right? Do I move this way or that way? Do I move towards something or away? And to do that, to make that decision, so it's not just random and haphazard, which isn't necessarily beneficial, you have to be able to make some sort of prediction of the outcome of your choice before you make it. And that necessitates even the most basic level of a brain to be able to do that. It also forms the platform of really all human behavior and cognition, which is approach and avoidance, right? With approach and withdrawal, which is really the way that the two hemispheres really operate. The right brain is more based on withdrawal and behavioral inhibition, and the left brain is more approach. So it starts with that and that knowledge and information, and really trying to look at the most detailed, PhD level of answering those questions, and then talking about what can you do about it and how does that relate to symptoms, and then from that describing to people what it is. I got to the point where I had to translate that into a laybook. And Disconnected Kids came out of the fact of a few things. One is my area of research, and the main problem that we were able to define in that textbook is called a functional disconnection syndrome. right? But moms in particular would come into me and say, I feel disconnected from this child. From the time they were born, I couldn't connect with them, or their child is disconnected, or they seem disconnected from their body. They would use that term all the time. So I thought it was really good to use that as the title of the book, because it resonated not only with the parents and how they described their own children and their relationship, but it also described the actual research of functional disconnection, which is really where all the research was going, in this field. So that's where the idea and the concept of disconnected kid and functional disconnection came from.
And what I love about not only your book, or your books, but the accessibility that is to explain it to the layperson, to the mother, to the father with these challenges that they face, but there's also the concreteness to it that the practitioners can pick this up and say, I can expand my understanding. I can now move into this field with a level of confidence and certainty and a depth of understanding. And at the centerpiece of that, of course, is the Melillo method. Can you talk about what the Melillo method is and how that is the process that brings about this reconnection?
Yeah. So again, it started out with really understanding what was actually happening in the brain in ADHD and autism. And it turns out that, again, functional disconnections where failure or poor communication early on that starts in development when the brain is developing and the two hemispheres are developing, and they develop at different times. So the right hemisphere develops really in the first 3 years predominantly, and then the left hemisphere. And the combination of genetic and non-genetic factors, meaning environmental factors and experience over those 6 years, really shape the foundation of the right brain and the left brain, and why they end up being very different in what they do, which really is, again, the core of who we are as human. We have the most complex movement system of bipedalism, and we have the most asymmetric brain. Our two brains are more different than any other animal, and that's an advantage. But it's also a potential disadvantage, because if something interferes with that very delicate balance and development, it can affect the ability of the two hemispheres to really integrate and communicate, or where we get, one side ends up dominating the picture and holds the other side back. And this can often happen if we don't move properly, right? If the child doesn't move and crawl and do those things, even though the United States, the CDC just changed those guidelines, which is absolutely ridiculous, and says that crawling no longer is a milestone. But I think we've all lost a lot of respect for the CDC and our medical communities, our higher ups over the last few years. But, those are very important stages. And so, the idea of how we get to communicate, and if there's something that affects it, the point being that it's called functional disconnection because there isn't any damage, there isn't any injury, there isn't a genetic mutation, there isn't anything broken in the brain. It's just the way it's supposed to communicate doesn't happen that way. So once we understood what the primary problem was and how it started, we realized that, okay, now it was, what can we do about it? But to me, people are out there talking about treatments that work or treatments that don't work, or, talking about what's possible and what's not possible. And they have no idea what the actual problem is. I don't know how you can say things unless you understand what the problem is, right? So then I focused my efforts on the solution. And the first solution, which is in disconnected kids, was something called a brain balance program. And it was about, trying to create balance in the brain by identifying different pathways of movement and sensory pathways like auditory, visual, tactile, smell, movement, proprioception, all of the things that drive brain development and that are used for information, and are the basis of cognitive development. Looking at those and saying, where are they? Are they developing appropriately? Are they hyperactive on one side of the brain and hypoactive on the other? And then based on the functional testing, devise a program that combines different sensory stimulation, motor activity, cognitive function, as well as supporting it all with diet and nutrition to be able to change the brain. the Melillo method is the latest evolution. I created, as you know, the Brain Balance program, and then I created Brain Balance Centers, where we had at one point up to 140 centers. I think we've worked with over 70,000 kids as of now. But those centers are really more academic centers. They're learning centers. They're not really healthcare facility. And we deal with high functioning kids that, can work together in a group. About 5 years ago, Brain Balance was running well enough that I didn't need to be involved in the day-to-day operations. So I wanted to focus on the ones that we can't really work with in that center and develop a program that was easily reproducible and comprehensive, but was for the most difficult cases I could get my hands on. The severe nonverbal autistic child or young adult, or brain injury or seizure disorders, or, the most difficult things in adults and in kids that were all developmental, like even mental health issues like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. We know they start in childhood. So they're developmental issues. And out of that, the Melillo method has grown, where I've taken that science, but I created a much more sophisticated model that can work with the most difficult cases using cutting edge tools, cutting edge scientific and medical tools to be able to do that.
It's brilliant. And that's what I love about it is it's not just accessible, it's something that certainly there's a lot of things that you can do clinically that will enhance and improve outcomes. There are particular approaches you use, technology that you bring to the process, but the book itself, one, provides a great theoretical background of what's happening in not just ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, but any neurological condition, as you said. And then it gives that ability to, here's activities you can do, here's exercise you can do, here's food choices that you can make, here's supportive processes and actually thoughts that can be helpful to you, and the mindset that you can bring to your relationship with your child, to your understanding of this condition that allows the parent to develop this understanding. And then obviously for those who want to reach out, to create that opportunity to connect you with one of your centers, and particularly if there are those really challenging situations, to find solutions where in many cases there are none. And what I love is this is just such a comprehensive body of work to help people who may have felt that there isn't a solution. So how has this, your book's been received? How has the information that you can restore functional integrity to a nervous system been received by patients, by the community, and what type of impact is it having?
Yeah, the book first edition came out in 2009. Second edition came out in 2015, I believe. And actually, I'm now working on a third edition. And the only reason why you get a third edition is because the other two editions are doing pretty damn good. It's also in audio, and it's also been translated, I think, into 18 languages now. So every year we get probably at least one or two more languages that are translated. And again, they don't translate them into different languages if they're not selling pretty good. So, I would say that it's probably one of the best-selling books of all time in this genre. As a matter of fact, today I had to buy some books for my center because I have to buy them like everybody else does. And looked on Amazon, and I think a Disconnected Kid was like number 5 in autism and childhood disabilities. So, that's pretty good, when a book is number 5 in anything, so it's
that years later, it's just got such longevity.
Yeah. And it's actually even, the funny thing is, because I think that's why my publisher, which is Penguin, which is the largest publisher in the world, they approached me to do 2 new books, which was a second edition of this and then an adult version of this, because I think my books are more popular now than ever. They're selling more than ever, I think. And I think it's because we were really ahead of our time. But I think also because, as we talked about, there was an interesting article that came out in the New York Times recently that got a lot of attention in the autism community about how, over the past 10 years ago or whatever, there was a lot of complaint that there wasn't much research into autism, which was true. Over the past 10 years, there's been a relative significant increase in that research. But what parents are frustrated is there hasn't really been any really useful treatments that have come out of that. And what people need is not more research now. They need more, what do we do about it? And that's really where my program, I think, more than anything else, the results I'm getting, the practicality of it, what we're doing, how we make it where the parents are doing the vast majority of the treatment at home, which is the only way it's really going to work, because it needs to be done at a high frequency. It's also much more cost effective when they're doing the treatment. What we need now is really practical. And in that book from the beginning, I gave people, as you said, really practical, hands-on, this is what you can do about it. And this is how you can measure it. And this is how you can, basically, I'm trying to teach you to become your own child's doctor, right? Which I think the only way to really make a difference in healthcare, in a big way, and even in healthcare costs in general, is that people have to be in charge of their own health. They have to be their own doctor. They have to be their own parent's doctor. That I use the analogy that when you and I'm sure you're younger than me, but when computers first came out and there was the DOS language, right? Only like very few people in the computer world could, if something happened to your computer, you had to get somebody to come in, right? You had to bring it to like a computer doctor because it was too complex a language. It took years to learn it, right? And then now we're all basically like our own computer doctors, right? We all can kind of fix or figure it out, or if there's something wrong, we know how to do it. And, very rarely do we ever need to go to somebody to fix our phone or fix our computer or anything like that. And I think we have to do that with our body, and it's going to start with our brain. And so I think, my book has been received, very well. As a matter of fact, I just found out from my publisher that Reconnected kids and I think Autism, the Scientific Truth are also both going to become audio books. And for that to happen, again, years after they were both written, I think it just shows that they're more applicable now than ever. And I think they're going to sell even better over the next 10 years.
The world has changed to the point where this really is the functional disconnection, and the changes to brain is the real epidemic, if not pandemic, that we have to address, and the impact that it's having on lives and families and even communities is so significant. I think you've written not only a timeless classic, but also a life-changing book for so many families. The last question before I bring this conversation to an end, although I always love speaking with you, the conversations could go on and I would be constantly learning, is not only for the patients watching this, but for the practitioners watching this as well. And there'll be many practitioners who will go, look, we know that Dr. Rob is a world authority. We know that he has multiple degrees. He trains doctors in the Melillo method. He writes books. He's written a textbook. And this can be a little bit intimidating. So I'd love for you to share your thoughts around your journey to mastery and what a practitioner who may be beginning their journey as a new graduate, or may have been in practice 10, 15, 20 years and has succeeded to the extent that they are content where they are, but have not necessarily fulfilled all of their potential and accessed all of their gifts or developed all of their understanding. It's easy to sit back and look at Dr. Rob and say, I could never be and never write or never deliver the level of knowledge, insight, and information you provide. But I don't think that's the case. And I think that, one, you're an incredible, humble man, and you have been a very hard-working man. So I'd love for you to speak to not only certainly the practitioners, but even the parents who might feel like it's overwhelming to learn what they need to learn to realize their potential and to serve their families and kids. What's your message to those who really have not fulfilled and accessed their gifts, that they may learn more, grow more, develop more, so that they can become more?
Well, first of all, it's never too late. That's for sure. And I'll relate what my son is just in chiropractic school, and he's, getting towards the later stages. And so it's the same thing, same message I give him. First, you have to start with some sort of vision down the road. It's kind of like you have to say, what's the end of your life story going to look like? Like, what do you want it to look like? Like when you're on your deathbed, what do you want your life to have looked like at that point, I think? And realize that you have so much time in between, and I think people realize that, to be, I think, a master at anything is really just being persistent long enough, right? It has nothing to do, I don't think, really with intellect or talent or how much money you're born with or anything. It has to come with, I mean, there's obviously advantages if you're raised in a family where your parents teach you that there's unlimited potential in all of us and that you can be anything that you want to be. And I think the lack of privilege is children that aren't born with that aren't given that message. But even so, there are people that have been raised in horrible circumstances and have gone on to change the world. So it's really, I think, whatever you can imagine, I really do believe, and whatever you can imagine, you can be. I believe that our imagination is the manifestation of the creative force of the universe, whether you call that God or you call it just a universal creative force or universal consciousness. I think it's kind of one and the same. And I think that, we need to first get a sense of what we want to do. And I think for me, it really started with, I remember I was 5 years old and I was sitting with my brother who was 8 at the time. And we had a counter. It was in the mid 1960s. And my father, we were sitting there and every Sunday or Saturday, we'd go and get haircuts and we'd go to a diner and we have breakfast with, just the boys. And, we'd get egg sandwiches and we'd sit at the counter and it was fun and got a vanilla milkshake. And I remember my father at one point got serious and I don't know why, but I remember him saying to us, he said, boys, you need to leave a mark on the world that, you have to give back. You have to be able to do something. You have to make a difference. And I remember looking up with him and I remember sitting there thinking, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now some people have heard that story and said, wow, that's a lot of pressure to put on a little kid. I never felt that at all, but I felt like, my father was basically challenging us and saying, you have to make a difference in the world. You have to give, you have to do something. You have to do something that matters with your life. And from early on, to me, that just made sense that I wanted to help people and it was healthcare. And that was where I wanted to grow. And then within there, it was always about, how do I do that more? And, contribution is, I think, along with growth, are two basic human needs. Tony Robbins talks about that, and I think it's a good model. And those are two human needs that you never get to a point where I've done that enough, right? You may get where you make enough money, you may get where you may get enough success or fame or all the other things, but you never get to the point where you say, I've grown enough or I've contributed to humanity enough. And it's really addictive. And it's like, the more you do, the more you want to do, the more you believe you can do. And it's really a matter of just doing. It's like I have a lot of people that I've inspired to write books. And many times they tell me that I heard you. And I remember you just said, you said something that really caught my attention. You said that if you want to write a book, excuse my French, I usually say, just go write the book, right? Just do it, right? What are you waiting for? Like, you can write. Just sit down and write. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to get a degree. Just do it. And the doing it is your degree. The doing it is, when I first wrote that textbook, it's a 500-page textbook with 4,000 references. I'd never written anything before. And the first thing I wrote was a PhD textbook that got published. But I read a lot of books. And I had a voice and I knew what I wanted to say, but mainly I knew I wanted to make a difference. And it started with that. So I think that's it. It's just, you have to kind of say at the end of your life, what's important to you? Do you want to make a difference? Do you want to change, and I think any purpose in life has to be revolve around making a difference in other people's lives, right? Your purpose can't just be to be a billionaire. I mean, to me, that's not purpose alone. It's what are you going to do with those $1 billion?
Rob, I love speaking with you, and it's such a profound and powerful message. And Everyone, grab a copy. It's going to change your life, your family's lives. It's going to expand your influence, your impact, your ability to serve. And that's exactly what Dr. Rob's last message is, really, that we all have an opportunity, maybe a responsibility, possibly even an obligation, to grow ourselves so that we can impact the world, make a positive and profound change, leave our legacy. There is so much you have done in that regard, and I know you're continuing to serve and grow your influence and impact, Dr. Rob. So I'm so grateful for you. I'm appreciative for all you have done, the impact you've had on my life, the impact you've had on the patients within my practice. And from what I have learned from you, I know you're going to continue to change the world in profound and powerful ways. So I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you.